It's KRCB FM Radio 91. Doug Jane here with you. And I'm proud to have a special guest in the studio. Bruce Cockburn is here. Bruce was born in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And a miracle day happened when he was scrounging around in his grandma's attic, and he came up with this old beater guitar that he took and painted stars on. And his parents insisted that he actually take lessons and learn how to play the thing. By 1964, Bruce was attending the Berklee School of Music in Boston. Upon returning to Canada, Bruce played in bands. One of them, Olivas, shared the bill with Cream and with Jimi Hendrix in 1968. In 1969, Bruce began a solo career, which he produced 9 albums in the 1970s alone. His latest album, Bone on Bone, released just last month, is Bruce's 33rd album. Bruce just returned from Toronto, where he was inducted into the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame along with Neil Young. He's also been inducted into the Canadian Music Hall of Fame. He's won 6 Juno Awards for folk music artists. And in 1983, Bruce was named a member of the Order of Canada and was upgraded to Officer of the Order of Canada in 2002. The award is the highest award of honor in Canada given to those who make exceptional contributions not only to Canada, but to humanity as a whole. Bruce has traveled the world working for charitable organizations such as Oxfam, Doctors Without Borders, Amnesty International, Campaign for Landmine-Free World. And Bruce made the U.S. charts in 1979 with the song Wonderin' Where the Lions Are, and in 1984 was all over American radio and MTV with Lovers in a Dangerous Time and If I Had a Rocket Launcher. Bruce currently lives in San Francisco with his 5-year-old daughter, Iona, and his sweetheart, MJ, and we are so happy to have him here. Bruce, hello.
Hi. I don't know how to follow that introduction.
Well, you must get introductions like that all the time. I mean, does anyone ever just introduce you and go, tell me about yourself?
Yeah, actually, that does happen, which is actually harder, so thank you for that. I never know what to say about myself when someone puts it that way. But well, I was born and I haven't died yet. You know,
that's the secret to a long life, right?
Yeah.
Just don't die. I just got done reading your memoir, Rumors of Glory, and it's tremendous. And what is really great about reading a memoir is that you spend so much time with the person while you're reading it. I mean, I've heard most of your albums, and you hear an album, you're doing stuff around the house and that. But I mean, when you're reading a book, you're really into it, and
you're actually compelled to pay attention.
Yeah, it's really terrific, and I want to talk to you more about that. Do you want to start with a tune?
Sure. You mentioned "Lover in a Dangerous Time." This is perhaps a good one to start with, and it's unfortunately it never seems to quite become obsolete. So. The hours grow shorter as the days go by. You never get to stop and open your eyes. One day you're waiting for the sky to fall. The next you're dazzled by the beauty of it all. When you're lovers in a dangerous time. sometimes you're made to feel as if your love's a crime. But nothing worth having comes without some kind of fight. Got to kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight. When your lover's in a dangerous time. Lover's in a dangerous time. Your lover's in a dangerous time. Lover's in a dangerous time. Lovers in a dangerous time. Whoa, 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 whoa,
Beautiful. Bruce Cockburn is here. He's really here. People were asking, is it a Bruce Cockburn tribute band that's coming up? No, it's him. He's really here. Bruce, I want to ask you about your memoir, Rumors of Glory. When did you decide to write it?
Well, I was approached by the publishers. Jeepers, I don't even remember what year it was now, but some years back.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 7 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
And we met in a bar on Haight Street, and they said, we'd like you to write a spiritual memoir. We're sitting there drinking bourbon, and they came up with this. And it just seemed like the right time. I'd been approached by other publishers and various individuals who wanted to write my biography and so on, the official version. And I always felt like it was my story to tell, so I wasn't interested in having someone else tell it. And it seemed too soon until this point. It seemed like there wasn't enough of a story. You kind of have to wait till you've been around for a while. I mean, I remember seeing, an autobiography like by Avril Lavigne when she's like 18 or 19. There's a coffee table book sitting there, and hockey players who were
My life,
20 something. Yeah, my life so far. Maybe would be okay, but in any case, that I didn't want to go in that direction. So
did you think about a co-writer at all, or a
I
collaborator?
did, yes. And at first I didn't. At first the first thing I said to them when we got down to that part of the conversation was, I'm going to need a co-writer because I know myself I'm not going to get it done. I'll tell you I'll get it done, but I won't do it. And they didn't like that idea. They wanted me to do it myself. And
Wow.
then they agreed to support a co-writer. But then my wife and Bernie Finkelstein, my manager, kind of persuaded me that I could do it myself and I didn't need a co-writer. And I liked the idea. So I started on it, and I got about 100 pages in, and I got completely bogged down. So I called my friend Greg King, who lives up in Arcata, who's a journalist and an old-time activist from way back, good guy, and I asked him if he would participate in it with me. So we co-wrote the book, basically, and from that point onward, I mean, we used most of what I had written in that first 100 pages, but Greg brought a lot to the game, too.
Well, the thing is with your albums too, being so prolific and having so many albums coming out from 1970 something, that was kind of like almost like a diary that you could go back and look at each one and think, here's what I was doing then.
Well, we did end up treating certain songs in that way, they provide a kind of framework for the book. And then, of course, once the book was done, it was decided that it'd be a good idea to do a box set of all those songs, right? Put them all together in a package. And that happened too. But it would be silly to try to write a book on my life without including the songs.
Yeah.
But the particular shape of it came from the request to write a spiritual memoir, quote unquote. And HarperCollins was unable to tell me what they meant by spiritual memoir, but they figured I was going to come up with something. And so the songs that we chose are songs that songs we chose to kind of hang the book on are songs that have some bearing on my spiritual journey, let's say, in one way or another. They're not necessarily overtly spiritual songs, although some are.
I love the way that you speak about your spirituality, and it didn't make me, as a reader, didn't make me uncomfortable, because a lot of times when, you're talking with someone, they're like, "Can I give you my testimony?" It's like, I'm late for a meeting. You know?
That's the people on the sidewalk like that.
But I really enjoy the candor and the stories that you tell about it.
Well, it's an ongoing journey, and I feel like nobody's got a perfect take on it. I believe that there is something we call God, and that something wants to be approached. It wants to be thought about. It wants to be engaged with. It wants a relationship. You might also call it the cosmos, or you might also call it any number of other things that work for you. Where we get into trouble is when we start trying to pin it down in words, in particular. Those words then take on a shape of their own, and then you have a set of images that are utterly earthbound, and what I think is that thing that we're invited to have a relationship with is way beyond that, and it's a convenience sometimes. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in, for example, the Bible, that's worthwhile and that can point toward that relationship, but there's other things that, to me, constitute a pretty serious impediment to it. And so, I wasn't comfortable with my original attempts when I first sort of started thinking of myself as a Christian in the early 70s. I listened to the sort of the hardcore evangelical folks because they seemed to have all the answers. Like they really knew what they were talking about. But, after a while you sort of go, wait a minute. I'm sorry, but I don't think putting my hand on that TV is going to save me. I don't.
Or sending a check to the
or
guy
sending
on
a
the TV,
check.
yeah.
I mean, like Bono says in that live album they did in Colorado, I think, or way back when, he says the God I believe in doesn't need money. And that was a pretty good point to make. Yeah, but I mean, there's a lot of room for different kinds of approaches to the divine, and I don't think any of us has any business judging any of them unless they appear to create grievous harm in some way. So.
Yeah, your household wasn't really it was a secular house, right? It wasn't.
Yeah, well, I thought so. My dad read a description, and this is before the book was written, but I had said something in an interview maybe about the fact that we went to church as kids because it was the 50s and we were expected to, and people would think we were communists or something if we didn't. So, but my dad said that wasn't true, that he and Mom really did try to be good Christians. And after a while it just fell away. I mean, later on they didn't go to church. I think once they realized that my great aunt wasn't going to be like mortally offended if they didn't show up in church, they stopped going to church. So the family component was there, and I think there was some social stuff involved in spite of my dad's denial of that. But I guess they really were. I mean, they were very moral people and very traditional in their understanding of morality. So we got a heavy dose of that, as well as, kind of aside from whatever church associations there might have been.
one of the you had a part in the book where you're talking about reading the Bible when you were a young guy with some of your friends, and because there was lots of sex and
violence, man. Like, we went through looking for the juicy bits. And, it was a far better way to get through Sunday school than just looking at these silly little pictures and hearing the stories. But, and then look what he did, And then, there was, I have to say, quite a bit more violence than there was sex, although some of the violence was of a sexual nature. But there's some really terrible things get done in the Bible, in the Old Testament in particular, but that are presented as historical things. And the message seems to be, look, here's the chosen people, as they define themselves, are basically just like everybody else, but they're a living example of the fact that not only are they just like everybody else, but they aspire to this relationship with the divine in a way that, it works for them and has been how the Western world has lived for thousands of years now. But you never get very far away from their humanity and their failures as humans. I mean, there's points in there where the Israelites act just like ISIS, and there's points in there where they shine, where there's really incredible stuff going on. And you look at the story of, I mean, I don't want to make this into a religious show for you, but look at the story of David, who's a character who's familiar to many people, whether they know the Bible or not. And he starts off as a kind of a fresh young kid who does a great thing for the country. Then he's forced to become a bandit, and he lives as a bandit for many years, and eventually ends up on the throne of the country. And then he doesn't behave himself very well when he's king for quite a while either. And then eventually he kind of gets it in the end. And to me, that's an example of human life, of the fact that relationship is there waiting, regardless of how far we are from it at any one point. That it's always there. So, this is what I mean by things that shine. But I mean, it was as a teenager, it was great to go through and pick out all the gory bits and stuff.
Yeah. Growing up in Canada, too, the memoir kind of starts off with some of your early memories as a kid. And within the first few pages, I remember there was a kid taking a crap on your lawn, and there was another one of your friends that was pissing on the lawn and looking at your mom defiantly. And I thought, what's with these Canadians? I grew up in Southern California, and no one crapped on anyone's lawn back in my day.
No, we didn't have any guns. That's the thing. Actually, back then we did. But, I mean, my family didn't. My mom had a BB gun. She showed me how to shoot, but that her father had given her. It was an old Daisy lever action BB gun, but it said Red Ryder on the side.
Right.
But my friend Billy, he wasn't crapping on the lawn so much as in his pants. It was a gesture aimed at his own parents, I think, more than anything. Although I had no clue about that at the time. But the kid who urinated on the grass and was really he was fit into the category my mom designated as bad kid.
Yeah, and do we ever know what happened to young Donald Trump? Did he?
Well, yeah.
So the book, the memoir, Rumors of Glory, is it's set up chronologically. And as you're writing it, were you remembering things and writing them down, or were you remembering things and discovering new things too? I mean, what was that like?
It was. What there was to discover was mostly what led to what. It wasn't so much a question of uncovering previously buried memories and that sort of thing, but just of sort of seeing a pattern to it. And I suppose I was looking for a pattern because I was supposed to write a spiritual memoir.
Yeah.
But the Greg and I talked a lot in the process of writing the book. He basically interviewed me ad infinitum on tour buses after gigs and that sort of thing, after a couple of maybe more glasses of wine, and over long enough that we got a big collection of reminiscences and events and so on to draw from, and like I said, it was really putting the book together. Involved making some sort of cohesive story out of all of that,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we got away with it.
Oh, I think it's great. Did you have a schedule that you would work on, like get up in the morning and work for so many hours, or did you?
I wish. Well, I did, but by default, my daughter was born just about the same time I started on the book. So, basically, I haven't had a good night's sleep in 6 years. I would write. I would, well, newborns are, they're very hands-on, but they're also very convenient in a way, because you can pick them up and put them somewhere, and you can, you can't ignore them ever, but you can work around them. But once a child is a toddler, that's no longer true. So the first couple of years, the first year wasn't so bad, except that my writing tended to happen between 3 and 5 in the morning, and then I'd be up at 6, that kind of thing. But and that pattern more or less continued. It was a hard slog, actually. As a writer, I had no previous experience writing an extended prose piece like that, and it's very different from writing songs.
What happened to the songwriting while you were writing the book?
Nothing at all. There were no songs. All the kind of thinking and energy that went into songwriting went into the book.
Were you concerned that you might lose your mojo for songwriting, or
yes,
because there was a period of time that you had where you had a little writer's block, if I'm not mistaken.
It wasn't so much writer's block as just because. I mean, I in the past I've had that. I at the end of the '80s, I went for about a year and a half without getting a good idea for a song, but that was kind of burnout from a decade of pretty intense activity. And after I officially declared myself on sabbatical, the songs just sort of started popping up, and those songs ended up on an album called Nothing But a Burning Light. But so I'd had that experience before. But there's a difference between a year and a half and 3 or 4 years where I didn't write anything. Right. So I wondered, it's like maybe I'm supposed to be writing prose now, or maybe I'm, maybe whatever, I don't know. I was hoping that songs would come back. It wasn't exactly writer's block, because there was all this other writing, but it was kind of a shift in direction. And I wasn't sure I could make the shift back again, but the songs came, and so, I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, and the new album Bone on Bone was recorded right down the road from where we're sitting right now.
Yeah, at Prairie Sun Studio.
Yeah. Well, great. I went in there. I did recorded a song a month or two ago, and Mooka gave me a tour, and he showed me where you sat and where you put your lyrics. And apparently, you had some lyrics that were like big and handwritten rather than just reading them off of an iPad or something. He said,
"Yeah, I wanted to be able to see it from a distance and not be like squinting while I'm trying to play." I've always done that. When we did a Christmas album quite a few years ago now, in the '90s, and at that time I was doing a lot of target shooting, and I had these big, practical shooting targets that are basically shaped like a kind of stylized human torso, and I wrote the lyrics, or printed them in Sharpie on those. But I didn't have any of those this time, so I had to make do with cardboard packaging. But
with bullet holes in them.
Well, actually, they got bullet holes in them after. That's one of the women who sang on that album was going, "Where did you get those big shirt cardboards?" And I told her what they were, and I said, "And as soon as we're done here, I'm going to take them out to the range and blow them to smithereens." And she was horrified.
Take that little town of Bethlehem, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're not my town. No, it's actually today it seems a little bit off color to be making jokes about shooting right now, but I had very good experiences with my years competing at target shooting.
I did not know until I read the memoir that you were a gun enthusiast for several years.
Yeah, I still would be if I had time, but I don't. But there's a big difference between the range and the stuff that we see happening around us, these terrible tragedies and this psychosis that seems to, it's like a layer that pervades society, and every now and then it pops up through the insulation, and one of these flakes goes off, whether they justify it by religious faith or a political agenda, or whether it's just pure selfishness. It's a really weird thing, and I mean, it's no place is free of it, no matter what the gun laws and what everything else. I mean, you're going to have that kind of stuff. In Europe, where it's hard to get guns, they stab people. They drive over them with their trucks. It's like it's a strange world that we've come into. And
it is. But the annoying thing about our country is that there's no way to even have a conversation about guns anymore. And I thought when the Newtown thing happened and kids got killed, I thought, okay, this will be the one that finally gets people to say, like, not everyone should own guns. Everyone should have access to them if they qualify.
Right, but then there's all the people saying it was staged. It was a big fake. I mean, sure, like it's impossible, like you said. And I think one of the great the sort of broader but less immediately painful tragedies of the era is the divisiveness that exists within this country, and the way in which it's promoted by the powers that be and fed off of. It's like, and I don't just mean Donald Trump. I mean, he's certainly an instrument of that. But I think there's energy behind that comes from somewhere that is just sucking it up like a vampire sucks blood. Mm-hmm. And how do you fight that? I mean, we can only fight it with love. We can only fight it with insisting on trying to understand each other. But that's a tough order.
Yeah, it is. Well, the new album, we'll segue into the new album, Bone on Bone, recorded here in Katahdin at Prairie Sun. And all the songs written kind of at the same time?
Over a period of time, over maybe a year or so.
Did it feel like it was an album as you were writing the songs were coming out? Like
It's always a wait and see. I mean, it's always been the pattern that whenever I have enough songs to make an album, we go in the studio and make an album. Mm-hmm. And it just, it might be a matter of months or it might be a matter of years since the previous album. In this case, it was years. But the songs reflect, that little stretch of my existence.
Can you mind doing a song off the...
Yeah, this is States. I mean, it's kind of somewhat apropos, I suppose, but although it doesn't really talk about any of the things we've just been talking about, it's certainly a song reflective of the journeying. So. Seen rose gold haze at the end of the day, ragged winged hawks swooping down on prey, curtain going up on the nighttime shadow play. Seen sun going down, set the sea on fire, black smoke boiling from burning tires, and bones in the mud was the blood sacrifice required. All the sights I've seen in the depth of the world and the heart of a dream. Ooh-wee, all the places I've been, each one reflected in the states I'm in. States I'm in. One day fit and one day fat, one day flush and one day flat, reality distorted like a sat-on hat. One day I feel like I'm in control, next I'm suspended in a bottomless hole, a drunk trying to shinny up a greased pole. All the sights I've seen in the depth of the world and the heart of a dream. Ooh-wee, all the places I've been, each one reflected in the states I'm in. states I'm in. I'm slick as a dealer in a green eye shade. Aces up his sleeve and he's not afraid. The mayor in his uniform, monkeys have been well paid. Climbing up the ivy to the balcony above, where pines the heart of my one true love. Obsession, delusion, all that waits is a fateful shove. Ooh-wee, all the sights I've seen in the depth of the world and the heart of a dream. Ooh-wee, all the places I've been, each one reflected in the states I'm in. States I'm in. In the treetops, motors in the road, structures of darkness that the dawn corrodes, into the title montage of a new episode. Whisper wells up from the deeps untrod, overflows this channel and spreads abroad, gathers in power like a lightning rod. All the sights I've seen in the depth of the world and the heart of a dream. Ooh-wee, all the places I've been, each one reflected in the states I'm in. States I'm in.
What a great song to lead off the album. You know, I like to get nailed right away when I drop the needle on an album, and that song is so good for the first song. It's tremendous.
Thank you. Yeah.
Bone on Bone is a new album by Bruce Cockburn, and he's here with us. It's just a great pleasure to have you here. You've kind of gotten into a groove with making the records as far as the guys you work with. Colin Linden is kind of your go-to producer now, right?
Yeah, Colin's produced the last many of my albums, and we've basically been working together one way or another for over 20 years. He was an added guitar player in a couple of bands in the early 90s, the band that toured with Nothing But a Burning Light and again with Dart to the Heart. And we've done lots of bits and pieces of things together over the years.
And those two albums you mentioned were ones that were produced by T-Bone Burnett?
Those were produced by T-Bone. But everything after that has been Colin, except for an album called Life's Short Call Now, which was produced by John Goldsmith, who had worked with me a lot in the 80s and is a very gifted string writer, and I wanted strings and kind of that kind of thing on the album, so I asked him to produce it. But this album, the songs are pretty rootsy, and it just seemed right up Colin's alley, so, you know, he was the one to call. Does he give you ideas and tell you, like, that's not working, or, you know, well, he does if he has to,
or?
But it's a give and take. We talk about the stuff and how we want to treat it, and if he hears something, you know, that needs looking at, he'll mention it. But it's a pretty smooth relationship. You know, we both contribute ideas to it, and he'll suggest something, and I'll say no, I don't want to do that, or I'll say yeah, what a great idea, and but it's not just Colin. It's Gary Craig and John Diamond who are the rhythm section on most of the album. There's a bass player named Roberto Acapinti, a Toronto jazz guy that plays on a couple of things, and he and I have done some things together too, here and there. But Gary Craig's toured with me. John Diamond was part of those same bands that we mentioned a minute ago, playing bass, and we also added Ron Miles on trumpet, who worked out really well, I think, and my nephew John Aaron Coburn on accordion, who's also in my current touring band now. So we're having a lot of fun on the road.
And that band's hitting the road soon, or
we've already done the first stint. We just spent several weeks doing Eastern Canada, and it's worked out really well. And we're off for the month of October, and then we'll be doing the Eastern U.S.
Nice. And you're coming here to Freight and Salvage sometime in the early part of the year as well, right?
In February, I forget the exact dates.
Will that be a band thing, or?
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, same
Cool.
band. It's Gary and John and John Aaron, and it's a 4-piece.
Yeah. There's a story that you tell in the your memoir, Rumors of Glory, about working with T-Bone, and that T-Bone had told you it's probably good to only use a producer one time. Then you mentioned that to him when you were recording your second album, when then he forgot that he ever said that.
He'd forgotten he said it, but I mean, I don't know if it was really true or not. I mean, from certain angles you could say, well, he was right, but in other angles not, because I think the Dart to the Heart album came out really well. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there was any loss incurred as a result of T-Bone doing 2 in a row.
No.
And I actually don't think he probably really meant it. I think he was just giving himself an out if he didn't want to do it.
Yeah. What? How did you end up in San Francisco?
My wife got a job. She was living in San Francisco when we first started going out. This is, 14 years ago, maybe something like that. I'd have to look it up to be sure.
You enjoy living in the city?
Yeah. I mean, we didn't live in the city right away. I've been living there about 8 years. I have mixed feelings about it. It's a place. I mean, on the one hand, it's got great things about it, and not so great things, and like any other place. It's a very beautiful city, and I've made some good friends, and I'm happy about that. And it's a place. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the only place that's ever really felt like home is the tour bus. And as long as I'm near an airport, I can live anywhere, quote unquote. But MJ wanted to come back to San Francisco. Like I said, she was living there when we first started going out, and she went east and to study, and came back eventually, having been offered a job here. So,
you a sports fan at all down here? Giants games or?
I live around the corner from a sports bar, and the streets are filled with the Giants. Like when they're doing well, at least you don't hear much.
Not so
when
much
they're
this year, yeah.
But we've had some great times, I didn't go, but a friend of ours and MJ took our daughter to her first baseball game.
Oh, cool!
A few weeks ago, and she loved it.
That's exciting. Well, it's such a beautiful park, and so family.
I've never seen it. I went to one baseball game as an adult once. I think I might have gone to some as a kid, but I mean, Canada. Baseball's not as big a part of the Canadian scene as it is here. And in Toronto, if you lived in Toronto, you have the Blue Jays and so on, and Montreal used to have a team, but in Ottawa, there was no baseball to speak of, no professional baseball. My dad used to take me to football games, and I went to a couple of hockey games.
Canadian football.
Football.
Where the field is longer and
you don't get timeouts.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we like to think it's a more manly game.
Right.
But MJ, I mean, Iona, my daughter, loved her experience with baseball, and I'm sure she'll want to go back. And she just liked the fact that there was a guy on the team named Panda.
Ah, yeah. Get a Panda.
What could be more natural for a little girl, right?
So one thing that I was surprised to learn about you is that you really struggled with nerves playing in front of crowds when he started out,
Yeah.
and really kind of dealt with it for some period of time, not just one
Well,
or
it
two
continues
gigs, right?
really. I mean, I deal with it more effectively than I used to, but and it's less than it was too. I mean, in the beginning, it was pretty terrifying. The idea of potentially screwing up in front of witnesses is really, that was the terrifying part of it, right? I wanted to share the songs with people. I wanted people to appreciate the work I put into the guitar, et cetera, but all of that was sort of overwhelmed with the idea that it would be an absolute disaster if I made a mistake. So I was terrified. I got over that pretty much.
Yeah,
I mean, now I make mistakes, and I might cringe, but I'm not terrified.
Yeah. Yeah, and can you talk a little bit about your manager, Bernie? That's probably one of your longest relationships.
It is. It is the longest lasting relationship of my life, other than with family. He and I have been working together since 1969. And it was interesting to kind of be at this thing, the Canadian Songwriters Hall of Fame event with Neil the other week. Neil and his manager have been working together about as long. Like pretty much that's the only other artist-manager relationship that I know of that is that long-lived. And it's just worked. So we keep doing it.
Yeah, that's great. What did he think when you wanted to take time off and write your memoir?
Oh, he was fine with that. I mean, it was.
He doesn't push you to go on the road or anything.
Well, I did the odd gigs through that period. I mean, it wasn't like I wasn't performing at all.
Right.
It's just it obviously put any recording plans we might have. Well, we didn't really have any specific plans, but any intentions we might have had toward recording went on hold for that time. But and toward the end of that time, he was going, "Well, do you think you're going to write any more songs? Are we going to do another album?" And which.
I'm sure he talks just like that too.
Yeah, well, he does a little bit, and he I mean, his questions more or less reflected my own questions about that. So,
another thing that I found out about you that I thought was very interesting is not that many years ago, when you had walked away from your stable, you had horses and such and a relationship. You were broke. Like it was the first time when you're like, you said in the book you had no dough and you moved in with someone as a roommate or took a room with someone.
Well, basically, yeah, Linda Manzer, the guitar maker whose guitars I play a lot, was kind enough to give me a room in her house. And, I mean, I wasn't completely dead broke. I think I had about $3,000 left. But basically, I mean, we had a stable full of a small stable. We had a dozen horses there, some of which were boarders, but there were half a dozen horses that were ours. And the woman I'd been living with was left with those horses. And the horses are expensive things. I mean, it's you can't imagine actually if you're not in the scene like how expensive they can be. Even the cheap ones, which is mostly kind of what we had. But so I basically left her all the money. And the way it worked in Ontario, when I got divorced from my older daughter's mother back in 1980, 81 in there, the law required that each party has to have a lawyer. I mean, there are some states, in Vermont, for instance, I don't know what it is in California, but in Vermont, a couple can just decide they want to draw up divorce papers. They can go see a single lawyer and get it done. But in Ontario, where I was, you had to have an adversarial situation. You had to each of you have your own lawyer. So I decided at this point, well, we both did. When I was leaving the horse farm, we decided that we would we'd do it through mediation instead of through lawyers. But then once we got the mediator said, well, we still have to work through lawyers. It's just I mediate between the lawyers. Well, why are we paying you? But anyway, it was a complicated process, and it got done. But one of my lawyer said to me, well, you're just giving her all this money out of guilt. And I said, no, actually, not at all. I'm giving it to her because I can and because she needs it. And, it just... it was a little scary to step out of that situation with so little. But, I mean, the next thing that came along was an invitation to write a theme song for the kids' cartoon show Franklin, which has been very lucrative, relatively speaking. I mean, in my world, it's lucrative for all this time now since then. So, there was gold on the other side of the hill. But I just figured, when I first started into music in the 60s, I dropped out of music school with the sense that I had no idea what I was going to be doing. I didn't know where it was going to go or where it would lead me, but I knew it had to do with the guitar, and I knew I'd be playing music. And if I ended up playing for pennies in the subway, that's fine. But I had to take that step, and
it was kind of divine intervention, really, wasn't it?
Well, it was
retrospect.
I feel like less. You could call it intervention. I feel like it was more like listening to the prompt. The little nudge comes, the quiet voice that says, "Hey, just go do this now. Don't question it, just do it." And the same thing was true in the 90s when I left the horse farm. It was, a little more complicated because we were grown-ups and there was more people involved. I mean, somebody else's feelings besides mine, for instance. But basically it was the same thing. It's like, I can step out, and if I end up, if all of this goes nowhere and everything winds down, I end up penniless. Well, that happens to people sometimes. Big deal. That's not what life is about. And it didn't, of course, happen that way. And I guess I probably deep down knew that, so I didn't feel so bad because the records are still out there. I was still getting gigs. I was still, life went on.
Yeah. And then, of course, the download thing happened. There was no more records, and things got a little
there's that
spotty for a while.
That's again the case, and we're still living with that. It's going to be like that for quite a while.
So it's weird. It must be weird writing a memoir and then talking with a guy that you just met, and I'm asking you about your finances and your stage fright, everything. We would never ask you that. I would never ask you that stuff if we just met and I didn't read this book.
Oh, if we were sitting in a bar next to each other, you probably would.
Yeah, who knows? The curse of the memoir.
Yeah.
It's a great one. I recommend it to everybody. Rumors of Glory is the name, and the new album is called Bone on Bone. Bruce Cockburn is here. I'm so happy, and you can do another song for us.
Yeah, this is another one from Bone on Bone. This is called 40 Years in the Wilderness. 40 years in the wilderness, getting to know the beasts, projected and reflected on the greatest and the least. 40 years of days and nights, angels hovering near, kept me moving forward, though the way was far from clear. They said, take up your load, run south to the road, turn to the setting sun. Sun going down, got to cover some ground before everything comes undone. Take up your load, run south to the road, turn to the setting sun. Sun going down, got to cover some ground before everything comes undone, comes undone. 40 years in the wilderness, dancing with the flies, dazzled by the visions rolling out before my eyes. Angel-made graffiti, demons in disguise. You could trade away your birthright for another day's supplies, or you could take up your load, run south to the road, turn to the setting sun. Sun going down, got to cover some ground before everything comes undone. Take Take up your load, run south to the road, turn to the setting sun. Sun going down, got to cover some ground before everything comes undone, comes undone. Rising with the height of land, falling with the crowd. Spirits in the scouring wind called my name out loud. Said you could go to heaven, you could go to hell, you could hang out in between in the place you know so well. Or you could take up your load, run south to the road, turn to the setting sun. Sun going down, got to cover some ground before everything comes undone. Take up your load, run south to the road, turn to the setting sun. Sun going down, got to cover some ground before everything comes undone, comes undone. Thank you, thank you.
We'll be here all week. Great song.
Thank you.
Bruce Cockburn is here. And Bruce, I want to ask you one thing about the memoir, Rumors of Glory. Are you able to kind of step away from yourself and read the book and get a feel of who this person is? I mean, who's been presented in this book at all?
To an extent. I read it a lot of times.
I'll bet.
As you can imagine. I had to proofread it and then read other people's, renderings of the proofreading and over and over again. So I read it a lot. I don't feel any great compulsion to read it again. But I can step back from it to some extent. What I think about is, am I ever going to write volume 2?
It ends a little abruptly.
Well, it ends abruptly. I mean, it just ends when it seemed right to end it. It ends before I moved to California. It ends after I went to Baghdad and came back, and it was right at the beginning of my relationship with MJ, and so that's it just seemed like a good place to leave it. Everything changed after that. The last picture in the book is us walking away, my wife and I, and
it's
our
such
daughter.
a sweet picture.
She's like 18 months old in that picture, and it was a lovely picture, and it just seemed like, okay, this is where it's going now, but it's too soon to know what story there is to tell about that.
Yeah.
So if I live long enough and, I'm prevented from writing songs for some reason, maybe there'll be volume 2.
I was reading one of the headlines in the paper on a couple days ago was that they'd sent troops into Barcelona to mess up their election over there. And I saw that headline. I thought, this is a job for Cockburn.
There's a lot of jobs for Cockburn if that's how we're looking at it. I mean, boy, that's, and it's you could start pretty close to home with that kind of stuff. But what I don't feel like doing in the current circumstances is traveling to a bunch of places I might not come back from, because in the past that didn't seem like a big deal. But I'm responsible for my daughter's well-being at this point, and I don't want to, take those chances in the same way that I did. That's what I tell myself. Whether there's some other reason for feeling that way, I'm not sure. But I'm not saying I won't do that kind of travel again. But I did go to Afghanistan in 2010.
Well, thanks for traveling to Roner Park.
That's the scariest of all.
Yeah, we're out of time.
Up that highway.
On behalf of everyone here and everyone listening, thank you for all the work that you've done, and you're a marvelous artist, and great to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me here. It's been nice,
Bruce Cockburn,
nice to
everybody.
spend the time with you.